GO.Live Gaming Podcast on the 1st of February 2018. That is the date. I did it. Now I have done my job and I can go to sleep.
Where did January go?
January just disappeared, man.
It just
disappeared. All right, so we're the gaming podcast, the GO.Live Gaming Podcast, which usually talks about EA, Bioware, and Anthem, and we are going to do so today as well. We're going to try to sort of just continue where we left the discussion last time with talking more about Anthem. And there's going to be quite a lot of other stuff that we're going to talk about as well. A little Dragon Age. There's been some mention there. There's been some Battlefield mentions as well in the recent news, in the recent times. So that's all exciting. So that is something that we're going to talk about today as well. But yeah. So first off, I just wanted to introduce my co-hosts, which are Chromatism, also known as Josh, per usual.
Hello.
Hello. And we also have Raker, also known as Patrick.
Hey there.
We're just a three-man team this time around, and this will happen from time to time. I won't always have 4 or 3 other co-hosts with me, but it should be an entertaining and good time nonetheless.
Betrayed.
How could this happen?
Indeed. So, what you guys been up to since last time? Anything interesting? Anything noteworthy?
Monster Hunter.
Yeah,
because I get to say it
right.
the third time going.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. If I hadn't checked my phone, I was like, "Oh, it's Thursday." I might have needed to send a search and rescue party because that has very much been absorbing my life.
I'm not surprised.
No, it's great.
I've heard a lot of good things about it, but it's just the thing about it being on console and.
Yeah, I wish I would have got it on PC if I could have done. I probably still will because I'm that insane. But yeah, I love it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And and if you are on PC, it's well worth waiting for. It really is.
Yeah, that's my understanding. But it sounds like a game that is actually quite a time sink, which I'm all for. But now when I have a kid and a job and a lot of other commitments in life, it's just hard to commit to things at like. I've heard of that some monster fights, at least when you get to a higher level, can be like around a half an hour or so.
Yeah, but I mean, the nice thing about Monster Hunter, and I'll just talk about it a little bit if you don't mind briefly.
Yeah, sure.
It's like the nice thing about it is it's always sold itself to those who've actually known about it, which has been kind of half the problem with the series. It's always kind of sold itself as these really big, grandiose boss fights. It's effectively what it is. It's kind of boss fights with like some limited survival elements, some gathering, some crafting. The crafting's a big element, but the boss fights are the main, and the combat are like the main meat of the pie. And even just taking half an hour, and missions cannot run over generally 50 minutes anyway. There's usually like a 50-minute timer. But it's like even just if you can only invest half an hour, you can only do a single boss, and that's your progress. It's quite a satisfying experience because you'll probably still go away from that. You'll gain more skill as a player. You'll gain more materials. You can craft new things. So yeah, it is a grind. Nobody could ever say Monster Hunter is not a grind, but it's a grind that constantly rewards you for doing stuff rather than a grind where you have to work and work and work and work for that tiny little next reward. So, which is one of the reasons it grips me so very much.
Yeah, that really sounds like something that would be up my sleeve or up my alley, whatever.
One day.
Yeah, one day.
Yeah, I think you just have to look at it like Overwatch or Dota. It's just a play session. One boss is a play session.
Yeah. There you go. And you can binge it if you want to. But yeah.
All right. So hopefully this time around, if you're tuning into the live stream either on Twitch or on Facebook or on YouTube, where we're currently live, you can hear that the sound should be a little bit more crisp. I sort of updated the hardware, but that's always interesting. I've sort of met this little bump in the road a couple of times. I'm not going to say which hardware I'm currently using, but one of the hardware that I'm currently using, for some reason, when I purchased it. Sometimes it's hard with the second language, the hardware or the purchase itself was stuck on pending while I made it. But I was like, okay, that was weird. And I just waited for it to update, and I waited a little bit longer for it to update, and it never really updated. But I got the hardware. I was checking my bank account and seeing like, that they haven't actually drawn any money for this. I got this for free, and it still says pending. And I checked back a week later, still said pending. Checked about a month later, it still said pending. And this time around, for some reason, there was some payment issues as well. It didn't draw any money. But this time they actually were on top of it over at Thoman, which is a really good, not sponsored or anything, but it's a really good site if you want to buy sound devices.
But damn, they finally
long.
worked it out.
Yeah, I can say that I saved like almost $300 because their system was flawed in some sort of way.
Would have been nice.
I didn't know Amazon were running that sales thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
just the walk-in grocery, walk out with the microphone. Hey.
So if you want to, you can send us a little email to feedback@gunsofanthem.com and guess which hardware I'm currently using, which I got for free, which probably isn't entirely legal, but hey, they haven't gotten back to me, and I just don't have the time to get back to them for some reason.
That's their problem.
I don't know why. It's just
That's their
never
problem.
get the time. Never get the time. You know,
I know.
it's interesting like that. But
Well,
yeah, Patrick.
I've been getting back into Diablo 3 a little bit.
Oh, really?
And now is also the time where my semester finally comes to a close. So I'm done with the first one. Now only gotta write my exams and then off to the second one. So yeah,
Alright.
that's what I've been up to.
It's going to be interesting to see if we actually get any sort of Diablo news. Not that that's where we're going to get this conversation in the end, but still, it's been a long time since we got a new game in that franchise, and it's also a franchise which I think is really cool. I really love the Diablo franchise. So
I was about to say, nothing says I survived my current semester at university quite like slaying demons for loot.
Definitely.
I totally agree. All right, let's try to steer this conversation to the topic at hand, which is going to be Anthem once again. And last time, I think we left it off where we sort of wanted to talk a little bit about what's been said on Reddit, because Bioware has actually been, or Brennan, I think his name is Brennan, has been quite active over at the Reddit forum, which is always a positive thing. It's always where when you should worry is when they're not talking to the audience or talking to the potential customers, like maybe, I don't know, not pointing fingers at anything, but Bungie.
Oh, no.
Maybe.
What? They don't communicate?
I don't know.
That's
It's just something
right.
that I've heard. Something. I don't know.
Don't know where you heard that from. Must have been some really backwater site on the interwebs there.
Yeah. But so we got some quite interesting information out of that. But I'm actually gonna lead the conversation over to Josh because he's a little bit more into the subject at hand.
Yeah, well, I just went through and read things. I mean, if that's into
Yeah.
it, then that's wonderful.
Maybe
really.
you read it a little bit more thorough than I did.
Oh dear.
But yeah.
Anyway, yeah. In that case, this is from Mr. Brennan Holmes, who has, as you said, has been very, very active on the Reddit community, on the Anthem portion of the Reddit forums. That would be the correct thing, I suppose. But yes, Brennan Holmes is the technical design director at Bioware. We're not just talking about a fella who is the a community manager.
Indeed.
He's actually quite high up in this thing, and he's taking his time to come and answer questions fairly regularly on Reddit, which I think is brilliant. So
Yeah.
I've got a wonderful list. I do like my lists of all of the sort of more interesting topics that he's covered. I'm just going to go through in order from some of the oldest information up to the newest. And we may have already covered some of this last week, but I'll just
some
the topics.
recapping is never a bad thing. So. Don't worry
So
about
one of the first things he said, and I think this was several months ago now, is that he confirmed that there would likely be no form of cross-play between consoles and PC. And he
Yeah.
cited problems between the companies playing nice together, but also, interestingly enough, he also cited problems with control schemes and fairness. Last week, Sarge, I actually remember, because how I remember it is beyond me, but on our last wonderful episode last week, everybody should totally go and watch, we had a thing, you mentioned that you weren't sure, or maybe you were hoping that there might not be PvP in the game. They might focus squarely on a PvE experience.
Yeah, there's some issues at hand with actually having a PvP component, because that's going to affect the PvE component on how fleshed out they can make that. But from what we've seen from Destiny, the gameplay is actually the strong suit of that franchise. So that works for them. So if they get that working, then fine. But still, there's going to be limitations on the PvE.
Yeah, I think you're right. If they go that route, it should be better. But I think the idea that he mentions controls specifically and a potential imbalance does speak to maybe they are going to push forward with some sort of PvP mode.
Yeah.
We'll have to find out. Watch this space. I'm sure we'll find that out as soon as we can.
I would love that. I'm a PvP guy straight through, so I would be happy with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, indeed.
Right. The next thing that Brennan talked about this particular post was quite a big one. Somebody said in Reddit they're worried about the potential for a toxic loot box economy in Anthem.
Yeah.
I can't quite tell where that's coming from. EA, Battlefront 2.
The evil empire of the gaming industry.
Yes, indeed, the empire.
The empire.
However, Brennan, I'm gonna read these out because I think it's worth it. Brennan says, the first one is basically just a summarization of of the fact that the team hears the gamers. They're all gamers themselves. They don't like loot box economies. They don't really want to see this stuff in their games. However, what he says, and I'm going to quote this. N9NZ says, "Hey Brendan, thanks for your response. In your opinion, what is the worst form of monetization you've seen in video games?" And this was his response. He says, "I think it has more to do with the philosophy around it. The first thing that most people do is look at the value of the sweat currency as compared to the premium currency. And I believe what he means by sweat currency, and I might be wrong, is the grind.
Yeah,
I believe
probably.
I wasn't entirely sure about that, but there we go. Personally, I prefer games where the ratio is somewhat reasonable, i.e. I can reasonably acquire currencies to purchase things through regular play. Personally, I also don't like it when things are only available for premium currency." And before we discuss that, I think it's well worth mentioning that's without doubt Brennan speaking from his own opinion. He's not representing EA and Bioware by saying that.
Yeah, I think so too.
It is, but it's good that there's those values inside of Bioware themselves, because that is going to have some precedence in the conversation with EA and how they monetize the game. But then again, probably EA has the final say on where the monetization actually lands in the end. But there has been, I don't think... I've read on multiple articles that they have sort of pointed towards loot boxes being cosmetic only. So that's where we're currently at. If that's going to be the case or not, that's just going to be... But with the recent year behind us, I would be very surprised if they try to do something else, because there's a lot of good faith they need to get back from the players. Certainly.
Oh yes. Like so, I'm really hoping. Fingers crossed at this point. Next on the agenda was apparently Brennan Holmes says he was very open to the idea of a clan system within the game. But that's on Reddit, the way you mentioned everything, it seems like they might have no plans set, or they're not talking about the feature. But he was very, very interested, and he was encouraging people to give their feedback on what they would like to see as social hubs within the game.
I really, one thing that I personally really want from Anthem is a good social aspect to the game, because that was something that I really lacked from Destiny. I actually tried my best. I went, I tried to communicate with people. I tried to find people to play with. I tried to find new people with similar interests in the game that I could play with. But the game itself is sort of designed to work against that. I don't know if that's them just trying to sort of squash the toxic communities or whatever, but you actually have to use the app in order to chat with your clanmates. That's your clanmates. That's people that you've chosen to actually interact with on a whole different level, which is beyond me. The only people that you actually can write with in the game is actually your fire squad, I think it's called.
That's right, the fire squads.
Yeah.
It's a mind-blowing decision.
It's really mind-blowing, and I really hope that Anthem is going a different way. Because one thing that I've taken away from other MMOs in the past, not that this necessarily is going to be an MMO, but it's going to be a persistent universe. So, like for World of Warcraft, for example, that's one of the strongest suits of that game, and that's where I have the most fond memories. That's actually having interactions with my clanmates, with people in the world, and random events like talking to people and getting to know people. That's a really strong thing. And of course, there's going to be toxic behavior because people are people, but that's sort of a part of it as well. And just if you just have a mechanics where you can just leave the lobby and search a new one instantly, or something like where those things don't become an issue that you have to struggle through. I think that isn't really an issue in the end. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also hope that they not only implement, if they even do that, normal clan system, but also something you can do with that clan, so that you don't just have a community hub, but also like maybe quests or giant raids, something like that for clan specific.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be like because from what we know so far, that might be worked on later. But from what we know so far, there's going to be 4-man teams only, or that's what they're working towards. But it would be nice to have shared goals, like if a strike team or whatever you're going to call them in Anthem actually completes a important goal in the shared world, then maybe that some resources go to the clan and people can see that progress being updated. So people actually see that people are doing something within the clan. Because yeah, it would be awesome if there was like the old raid mechanics from World of Warcraft where you have like
Definitely.
50 man teams. But we're talking about a game where I don't think that is taken into account when it comes to optimization. It's not. I mean, the Battlefield runs on the Frostbite engine, so it's certainly possible. But there's going to be a lot of effects on the screen, and I would be surprised if they make that possible. It sounds like a huge undertaking.
It does, yeah. I mean, I would be very satisfied if they want to bring that in later and just make sure they've got enough content for 4-man squads at launch for the co-op,
Yeah.
and then later they could branch out into that. I would be okay with that as long as there's enough at launch, for
Indeed.
everybody else.
that is important, and that seems like something they're quite worried about internally, because I think that that seems to be an issue with all these shared world games. Like the Division had this issue, Destiny has this issue, and I don't think there's been any game of this like that actually haven't had this issue before, where when it first launched, there's going to be you're gonna hit a wall that's where the content doesn't feel as satisfying, or where there's actually no content at all. Sort of
I'll
what
get
happened.
back to you about that when it comes to Monster Hunter, because it is actually in this genre. It's just very niche,
Oh,
as
interesting.
far as things
Yeah,
know
we can
that.
touch back on that.
We'll touch back on that one when I've actually played through more, because that's going to be hours and hours and hours. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so the next thing is a quick one, is that Brennan says that they are trying to balance the idea of the hub, or more to the point, they're trying to balance the idea of players needing to return to the hub. Basically, they don't want players to have to return to the hub constantly, but they're trying to balance it so there is a reason to return to the hub, but you're not going to have your play sessions interrupted halfway through because somebody's out of ammo and somebody needs to go back to the hub is how I read it. So I mean that's fair enough. They're thinking about that as a gameplay concern, which is reasonable.
Yeah, sure.
I think a good solution would be your own apartment in the hub or something like that.
Yeah,
that you can design.
That seems to be something like I think I'm not sure if that's a feature of the Division. But in World of Warcraft, you have your order hall, which is basically that. It's just a little bit more epic than an apartment. But something like that is certainly that. It would be weird if it's not in the game at launch, that it's not going to be introduced down the line, because that's been something that has been proven successful with other titles. So
yeah, it would be a reason why I return to the hub.
Yeah. I like I'm getting into World of Warcraft again for some reason. But yeah, so that's why I'm talking more about World of Warcraft currently, because it's on my mind constantly. But they have this also where you can interact with the order hall through a mobile app where you can do the tedious tasks that like send your guys on missions and so on, like
Mm.
NPCs that are on crew. And that's also a nice thing where you can grind money, which is usually quite a tedious thing, through other means, which I can't like. So I hope that's something.
Just to play devil's advocate just a little bit, but Patrick, you mean to say that in actual fact, if you had an apartment in game that you could customize, that would actually keep you playing for longer? That almost sounds like cosmetics are part of the gameplay. That's sorry.
Yeah.
just throw that out. I know. Right. Also, the next bit is a bit of fun. It's more interesting than anything else. Basically, somebody was talking about thoughts and expectations on the dynamic open world. And although Brennan didn't really specify too much about this, he did mention that they've got some pretty interesting technology where they even at one point they actually have the technological capability to have stuff like dynamic snowdrifts that will pile up over time. And he said that. Yeah, the technology is there. They and currently in game, he says they are obviously the game as far as we're aware, and as far as he claims, that might not be in the game at the beginning, considering it is a tropical environment. So
the snow, but they have a water accumulation as well. So that
he says it's subtle, but it is there. The technology is in the game, which is quite interesting. That's going to be just those little bits and pieces to really add to the world. Now, the next thing was quite a big topic, which is all to do with the enemy design philosophy. Because I know a lot of us have played games where enemies have been bullet sponges or been knocked out of the experience. I remember last week, Sarge, you said in the Division that it really just knocked you straight out. The fact you could shoot at somebody for 40 seconds straight and they would still not drop. We're just talking about a human enemy. So we had some pretty interesting stuff to say. He says, first of all, that their first part of their design philosophy that he mentions is that what they want are groups of enemies, or enemies designed with specific strengths and weaknesses that they can then put into groups that you then have to work around, which should create some quite interesting dynamic sort of gameplay situations. I mean, Destiny does do this a little bit, but I'm going to be honest, just getting out a different gun with a different element and shooting that thing because it's got a purple shield, I hope it's not quite that simple. I hope it's a little bit more than that,
I agree. But Destiny doesn't feel as bullet spongy to me because you usually have like insane number of enemies rushing towards you and you can take down most of them quite easily. It wasn't quite the same in Division. It was a little bit less, which made the characters or the enemies a little bit more spongy. But I feel like working on the mechanics of the actual enemies, so you have to think strategically when you go into a fight, sort of, I guess, like Monster Hunter World. That is a more interesting approach to gameplay from my point of view.
On the second part of the thread, basically a player asked, basically says that many devs have struggled with providing actual challenge rather than tedium, or rather what they're trying to say is, and instead you get tedium in boss fights and in mob design and that sort of stuff. And he said, basically he's asking how is Bioware looking at it, and I'm actually gonna quote this because I think it's quite an important piece. Brennan says it's definitely an interesting problem and one we've talked a lot about. The core issue here, I think, has to do with what is the difference between a new player and an expert player. And then he goes into a bullet-pointed list. Does the expert player have more power? In other words, progression? Yes. Are they mechanically better at the game? Skill expression? Yes. Do they have expert knowledge of game systems? Yes, etc. Given these factors and others like them, we have various axes to make things harder. As an example, for Insanity playthroughs on Mass Effect 3, the game was balanced assuming that you understood and were engaging with all of the game systems, in other words, expert knowledge. At the end of the day, will tougher enemies have more health? It's pretty likely, but that should just be a part of a suite of other things that also contribute to increased difficulty. Which is a pretty positive takeaway as far as I'm reading.
It really is. It's like I don't like the approach where they just give the enemies higher damage output and more health because that's not really intuitive. Like I think in I lost the name. There's a zombie shooter where you have hordes of zombies going towards you when you're like a 4-man team. It's not
Left 4 Dead?
Not Left 4 Dead. Why can't I remember the name?
There are like several.
Killing Floor. Killing
Killing
Floor,
Floor.
especially
Ah.
Killing Floor 2, had that where you go up in difficulty, the enemies actually get more skills, which they don't use in the lower difficulties, which is quite cool. So you have more obstacles to overcome, sort of, rather than like the standard, like higher health and higher damage output. So that approach itself is always something that I think is cool. That's a sort of I'm gonna tie it back to World of Warcraft once again, and that's also something where we have raids, the raiding system, the higher or the more difficult raids usually have some added mechanic to it, other than just a higher damage output and higher health on the bosses.
Actually, some of the best raids lately I've seen are Final Fantasy 14. Those things are absolutely amazingly designed. Love
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I haven't checked out that game too as much as I probably should have. I tried to get into it, but I just felt the MMO fatigue at the time, so I never got that.
Yeah, it's like the progression to get to where you want to be with that game. The story is good, but there are so many fetch quests in between. But the actual raids and the big boss mechanics are fantastically well done. So yeah.
Yeah, as a Zelda
sorry.
player, I think you could also implement in more games, not only Anthem, more phases to a boss, so that their moveset and their fighting style changes more often, so that the fights are more lively. I think that's a huge thing that could make fights more interesting.
Yeah, it just makes the game feel more alive and more dynamic. Like the higher up, when you sort of scale up yourself, the enemies scale up with you. So that's kind of cool.
And in StarCraft 2 is also, if you play on a higher difficulty, they actually use tactics that player use. So that could be a thing that they implement in later add-ons, so that they that the monsters or the enemies focus support and stuff like that.
Just wait when they implement real AI, like the one from.
Then we'll always lose.
Like the Dota 2 AI. I'm not.
Yeah.
Was it Google or was it?
No, it was from Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Yeah.
He's meddling in all kind of things.
It's weird that a guy like that is actually quite wary of AI, but he's still dabbling his fingers in the magic sauce when it comes to that. So.
Yeah. Anyway, just a few more points that probably don't warrant too much time being taken over, I don't think. But Bioware are very interested in developing an API to allow for out-of-game loot management. So whether or not you're on your phone, you can go, oh, I want to equip this armor, and so on and so forth. That's great. All in favor of that.
What does an API stand for?
Well, now you're asking. Tell you what, look that up, get back to me, because I'm not sure either. Something interface.
Yeah, I know this. I should know this from the top of my head, but I'm going to check it out.
It's not that important. Let's move on.
Let's move on.
No. It's something that people probably are going to be...
we'd be caught by the bug. Okay,
it's called
what is it?
Application Programming Interface.
Application Programming Interface. All right. Yeah, see, I totally knew that. Yeah. Okay.
Of course you did.
Now, as we covered last week, basically Brennan also confirmed that the world is an open world, but it basically has procedural loading. And this also ties into the next comment where they do have to be a little bit careful with the flight mechanics because so the procedural loading is that the world is basically done in shards. So when you move, as you move into one area, the area behind you will unload and the areas in front of you will load again. Quite what that means for players getting sort of too far away from each other, that's an interesting speculation. But I'm not sure about that myself. Basic flight. He's also commented that flight within the game will yield some player skill expression. So in other words, flight will have a player skill component to it, is what he's saying. But it will have limits. And he also said that basically getting too high, it sort of almost feels like you're being pushed down by a gentle downdraft. It's not some bang, you're in the skybox. It's you'll be pushed down into the limits.
Yeah.
And finally, he had the only last thing worth mentioning is that story length has not been revealed, and they're just not really in a position to talk about the story yet, at least publicly, to talk about the story with everybody. And that's pretty much been the takeaway from Reddit so far with Mr. Brennan Holmes. He has replied to some of the threads, but that's the meaty stuff, I think, right there that I've just covered.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
I think we should also highlight that they actually talked this much in case of Mass Effect Andromeda, where they didn't hate at all for the game.
Sorry, say that again. I missed quite what you said.
I
Yeah.
meant that it's really upside that they communicate this early, this much, because prior to the launch of Mass Effect Andromeda, they almost kept entirely quiet, and you saw the result afterwards.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they certainly have Mass Effect Andromeda in their calculations going forward with this game, especially since that game basically shut down their was it the Montreal studio or
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, they've certainly learned from their mistakes there. So all that sounds interesting, and we're going to keep an eye out to see where Brandon Holmes leads us towards next time. And it's going to be more and more interesting to see what they're going to say on the actual forums once they start their real ad campaign for the game. Whenever that is going to be, it's probably going to be somewhere this year. And that's probably where we're going to get more interesting details about the game and where they can start talking about details and releasing small tidbits, which we can speculate even more about. So that's all exciting and interesting. But we do have some other news when it comes to Anthem itself, and that is that one of my predictions from the first predictions episode has already failed, and that's that the game itself has been delayed to 2019. I was waiting to talk about this because there wasn't actually any confirmation from about that, but now we've actually, as it seems, have had a confirmation that that is the case, and that the fall 2018 launch itself wasn't actually that realistic, or they didn't even think that internally that was going to be the case. For some reason, they just decided, okay, we need to write something in the trailer. Let's just write fall 2018. That works. And that was what they were working with. So whoever did the promo or the first promo probably had that information, but it wasn't a realistic goal. So we're looking towards 2019. Whether or not that is going to be in the beginning of the year or later in the year, that is going to have to be seen. But I'm personally hoping for like February or March, because, yeah. What do you guys think? Where do you hope everything's
Go
going?
ahead, Patrick.
There's something they said about the fall 2018 release. So they also said that they didn't want to release it in that kind of quarter because there are most of the time huge games that will be announced and will come out, and they wanted to in a quieter quarter. And I think that's kind of worrying, the statement, because if they say that they want a quieter quarter, it can also mean that they are afraid that it can't compete with the releases that will come out the fall of 2008.
Maybe. I think it's more that they don't want to repeat their mistakes, because they did do this with Titanfall 2, and that game kind of suffered because of it. They released Battlefield 1, I think, was it Battlefront 1? And
Yeah, they launched Battlefield 1. Then they launched. Oh, sorry, you were about to say that. Yeah, Battlefield 1 and was it Battlefront? It was Battlefront. It was Battlefront. Yes,
and Titanfall 2.
that's the
Or whatever,
one.
so something like that, where they had a couple of huge titles that were released at the same time, which
Titanfall 2 was sandwiched between those
yeah,
two launches, which is
yeah, the consumers actually had to prioritize which game they wanted to spend their money on, and Titanfall 2 was the least interesting of those, so it suffered because of it. And since they are going to release a Battlefield game at that time, fall 2018, that seems to be what you're talking about, or they're actually going out there and saying it's going to be released during that time window, then they don't want to release Anthem at the same time because that could hurt sales. And whether or that being, or that is them being scared, or I don't think so. It makes more sense if there's a financial interest to that
Can
decision.
I pull up my soapbox just for a minute on this topic? Because something that Blake
Sure.
Jorgensen said has just driven me absolutely nuts.
Yeah, go for
Right.
it.
Oh, by the way, it was just before I get there. It was Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and that was
Yeah,
what it was
that's right.
sandwiched
It
between.
wasn't all EA titles.
Yeah, it
Messed that
wasn't
up.
all EA, but still, that timing was just obscene.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, okay. One of the things that I think it was Blake Jorgensen, who's the CFO of EA. One of the things he said is that we need to understand this is not a delay. They are just pushing it back, so it's not in the same release window, so it'll do better. Now then, if I can just have a moment, this is from the OxfordDictionaries.com.
Oh,
Delay.
he's
It is a
throwing down the
noun.
gauntlet.
Yes, it is a noun. Delay, a period of time by which something is late or postponed. Which would mean that, no, it is not a delay. It is, in fact, a delay, EA. Congratulations. Now, I'm just going to say this, and I'm just going to have a little rant now as a gamer, because this has actually driven me slightly insane. Jason Schreier, who we talked a little bit about last week, released an article where he's talked to 6 people that remained anonymous within Bioware, who said that the game was perhaps a little bit troubled because although the game's been in development for quite some time, using the Frostbite engine was designed with first-person shooters in mind. It was never designed with role-playing systems in mind. So they've had to sort of add new tools themselves. They've had to redesign parts of the engine. And sure, it's going to be a great experience. I do have faith in BioWare to deliver.
Yeah.
But the inside sources said that this was a slightly rocky. It has been slightly rocky going forward. Okay, fine. And also, I would also state that Schreier's article, and Jason Schreier is fantastic. As I said last week, he is the he is the game journalist at the moment who does proper research pieces.
I've heard a lot of good things about him, so he seems like a solid
Yeah.
source.
Yeah, he's good. He's a decent source, and I would say the fact that he did actually call the delay to 2019, it gives more credence to the article he wrote. So I'm just going to say this: EA. This delay, not delay, which apparently for a game, according to them, has had a smooth production cycle. There have been no problems whatsoever. This round object that is invisible is an apple. Now, the thing is, EA, when you point at this apple and call it a banana, this banana is still an apple, right? Okay. So the fact that as as a gamer, I understand the banana has some more practical uses. I get it that, as Imager has shown us, it is the common standard of scale, for example. And I can also understand, EA, that when you're talking to your shareholders and whatnot, I realize that with the problems that Battlefront 2 has currently had, it's only sold 7 million copies, and you predicted to sell 8, so it's a disappointment. We're all very sad about it. Very, very sad about that.
Crushed.
Actually, no. I'm going to be perfectly fair. I never want to see a game do badly, but I understand why Battlefront 2 did badly, all right? But here's the thing. I can appreciate that you want to sell this banana to the shareholders and you want to say, no, the game is fine. Everything is great. We just want to delay it a little tiny bit so that it will have the best possible launch window, and not because we want to delay it to polish things up. Now, as a gamer, I would have infinitely more respect for you, EA, if you just came out and said, well, you know what? We need to take a little bit more time, and we need to make sure that the launch is as good as we can possibly make it. Yes, You know what? I'm going to be disappointed a little bit. I'm looking forward to the game. I'm going to be disappointed. There are going to be people on the internet, some sad, sad people that are going to wish bad, bad things to family and pets. But you know what? It's okay, because you have an army of community managers that are your shield. You'll be fine. You'll never even see these comments. For the rest of us, however, for everybody else, the vast majority, I would respect you for just coming out and saying, make the game good. Delay it. It'll be fine.
But that's the thing, though. I think the more important aspect from EA themselves are the shareholders. And it sounds better to say stuff like that to the shareholders than saying that we need to delay the game because there's issues that we need to solve. Because once there's talk about issues about the product, then the shareholders get a little bit antsy, probably. That's what I
Yeah,
would be if I.
but isn't it a shame though that
It
there's
is,
such a disconnect between the shareholders and the
of
gamers?
course, it
You
is.
know,
We sort of live in a capitalistic world, and that's sort of the consequences of it, unfortunately.
mm,
But
oh
I
well.
certainly agree with you. It would be way better if they just went out and said we have issues with it, which we need to fix. But then again, it's going to be interesting to see where they set the final launch. And we actually have something else that we have to have in mind is that they have the EA access, where they give
Hmm,
access to titles like sometimes even months before the game is actually released, or at least a month. So
I hadn't considered that. Yeah.
no, I hadn't considered this either. It was something that I uh, read recently, and it's something that they actually have to have in mind when they're planning the release of a game, because now they actually have to have 2 release windows, and they have to have a couple of different systems in place there. So that sort of changes up the system a little bit. So we might get our hands on the game earlier than what they're talking about now. Just that for the wide audience that is not on EA Access, probably isn't going to get access to the game.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's also something that just needs to be considered in this
Interesting.
in this
Interesting.
little
Yeah.
what's it called?
Yeah, but EA Access is quite something. I played Andromeda on Access, and I don't know if you guys know this. They showed the very polished part on there,
Yeah.
and nothing about the rest of the game. And that's why I'm kind of on the edge of playing Anthem on EA Access.
Yeah, I get you. I get you,
But
man.
having said that, they do have a lot of quality full release titles on EA Access, and I've also been toying with the idea of actually signing up for a little bit, simply so I can actually play Titanfall 2, because that is actually on EA Access. So which is for me quite an interesting prospect. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And also, if we're going to move back towards the
sure.
concerns, if we should be concerned or if there's concerns at all, it sounds like currently from internally from the teams at Bioware working on the game, they're more concerned about how the game is going to be accepted because of the recent mistakes from EA. And
Hmm.
that is, of course, a valid concern. But uh, how that is going to affect the game in the long run, I hopefully only positive stuff will come out of that. But
Yeah.
that seems to be the main internal concern from what we can have access to right now. It would be awesome if we one day can get our own internal source, or just chat up a Bioware employee and have them come on the podcast, and we can have a chat and maybe make some friends and go over there. I can go over there and make some content. That would be cool. Bioware,
Do it, Satch. Yeah.
invite me. I would be thrilled to do something like that. But until then, we have to rely on information like this. But also, there is some interesting other stuff to take from this Kotaku article that was sort of. It got a mixed reception though when it first was released, but I think you have to sort of look at the article through through sort of a filter and accept some stuff and maybe not accept other stuff. And there's also going to be that where EA themselves said they're just trying to create a story. There's always that possibility, because let's face it, news sites nowadays actually sell, or they make more money the more people visit their sites and the more people read their articles. And if there's some flavor to it, then of course there's going to be more money involved for the news articles. That's unfortunately the world we live in. I'm hoping that somewhere along the line there's going to be a better system where news sites and news organizations get support from other places where they don't have a monetary interest in actually making the articles more interesting that they potentially was from the beginning. I hope, but that's a totally different discussion. So, but yeah, that's something that we have to keep in mind. But we also got Battlefield 2018 from this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you get that? And it's going to be interesting to see where they take it. There's been talk about World War II, which would make sense because the last game was a World War One game, and there's been talk about what's it called, Bad Company 3, which I personally hope for.
Yes,
I love the Bad Company
very much.
2, but to me, those names don't really hold any value because the game itself is going to have to speak towards where it's going to be at the end. So, but we also got some information that they're working on a new Dragon Age game, and it's going to be a game that is focused on more of a live approach, which sounds like what? What's a
A
live?
live service.
Yeah, apparently
Yeah.
it's going to be a game which you can play, and there's going to be constant updates to it. I think that's what they refer to when they say that it's a live service. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys remember, but I did have my prediction that it's going to be a multiplayer focused game. So I'm still
Yeah.
that could be a part of it. That could certainly be a part of it.
I don't know. It's like you look at you look at some of some of the stuff that's come out of EA lately, and yeah, live service, especially. I can't remember quite where. I looked at an article earlier today, and it escapes me entirely where it came from. But it was basically all of their. It was their profits and whatnot from the last quarter, and also the 12 months prior, and all that sort of stuff. And there's some huge figures on there. I think it was something close to sort of quarter three and the 12 months trailing. They
Yeah.
made $2 billion worth of profit or income at the very least on basically live services, also from mobile games and from FIFA and that sort of stuff, and only another 1.2 billion from the actual sale of games. So they're actually calling it live services, and unfortunately, it's just simply not a thing that's ever going to go away, especially in the big corporate world. I mean, you've got smaller developers such as Bethesda, who are privately owned, who can just make single player experiences. But I think with EA, it's going to, live service is going to be a thing that's going to stay around for a long time.
Yeah.
I just hope, I sincerely hope that Dragon Age is known more than anything for the story, particularly the first one in my case. But I mean, the story is the big hook, I think,
Yeah.
for
I
the
agree.
series. Now, I have heard one of the developers saying that basically, no, the story is still going to be fine. It's still going to be great. It just means there's going to be content for you after you finish the story. And okay, I can
Sure.
sort of see that, but I'm still shaky on that idea. I'm not entirely happy that good quality single player role playing games. That's the thing I personally thoroughly enjoyed. Divinity
Yeah.
Original Sin 2 was one of my best gaming experiences of
Yeah.
last year.
I have
And
to try that out.
sure,
It seems like it's just such a massive undertaking, that game, so it's just
yeah.
quite
To
scary.
actually play,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a massive undertaking to develop as well. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to Dragon Age, I think the DLC and stuff they added were most of the time neat little expansions, but
Mm.
that didn't change the fact that the game itself is still the single player full price game. So you didn't really have much from the DLCs, and unless they just don't finish the game and mean with live service that they gonna end the story after it's come out, I can't really imagine what they want to do with it.
Yeah.
Mm.
But then I'm also aboard your train there, Josh. Like Dragon Age Origins, for example, that was a solid single player RPG, which was one of the best times I've ever had with an RPG ever. It's an amazing game. I actually quite like Dragon Age 2 as well. Dragon Age, even though it feel or a lot of people said that it wasn't enough content in it, and I sort of agree. The world itself felt way smaller, way
Mm.
smaller than it did in Origins, but I still liked the game overall. But then we had Inquisition, which suffered the other problem where the game felt way too large, and it felt like playing an MMO in a single
An
player game.
MMO. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just weird from seeing them doing these different choices, and I sort of get not making the same or using the same recipe over and over and over and over. But Dragon Age Origins was so good, and then you have Dragon Age Inquisition, which was like this is quite tedious. Why do I have to do all these fetch quests
Yeah.
in my single player experience? That's not interesting gameplay mechanics or interesting gameplay at all. I was just quite baffled about it. So yeah, we're gonna have to see where this next Dragon Age game takes us.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
This is more just live. This is more about live services, and I can imagine that it probably put off some of the customer base because it's easy to be put off if you don't think about what you're actually spending in a game. But what would you say to the idea of some sort of, for these live service games, rather than constant microtransactions that add up and up and up and up, to an actual just some sort of subscription model like we used to have? I mean, what would be the downside, really, of that? I mean, there are games like, for instance, I remember Dungeons and Dragons Online, right? It's an older game now, but it went free to play, and it started to do better than it had ever done before because they kept the subscription model. They changed the way things work. They kept the subscription model. They had an in-game store, so you could buy exactly what you wanted, no loot boxes, or you could just kind of spend money to open character slots, which are permanent, or new modules. So it's like either you can have the subscription, so you get basically all of this stuff, or you just purchase what you want. There's the actual choice for you. If you don't want to commit to the subscription, you just buy what you want now, play it, and then maybe if you want to buy something else, I'll get the subscription later.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
think you go first.
Yeah, I like the idea of a subscription model. I kind of like the subscription model alternative. I like what the Xbox are doing with the Game Pass. I think that's a great idea. But then again, we're going into territory where people are going to have to prioritize which like services they subscribe to each month, because if you have like Netflix and you have this thing and then you have that thing and then you have that thing and you have this thing, suddenly you're paying like hundreds upon hundreds of dollars for your subscriptions, and that is not feasible. But I kind of like the idea of having that model and having the regular model where you pay to just access whatever you want, because the more options the merrier and the better for the consumer, and whatever better for the consumer, that's where my vote lies.
Sorry, go on, Patrick. You're about to say something, weren't you?
Yeah, I'm on the same side as Sarge. I think if you have another game and many more games that are subscription-based, the fees add up, and you have to choose a game or two games that you play and can't buy anything else, depending on how much you earn and how much you are willing to spend. And also another problem is that as soon as you don't pay the subscription anymore, that is practically not your game anymore. You can't really play it. So it's like you've sold it for the time being. And I'm not really a huge fan of that. I like to have a game that I bought and can play whenever I want.
Yeah. But then again, these live
even if it's
games, you're not going to have that. As soon as EA or Activision or anybody else says, "Oh, well, you know what? It's no longer feasible for us to keep this game up," it's going to be gone, because those multiplayer elements are going to be so integral to the experience. You're not going to be able to play the game anymore. I can almost guarantee it.
Yeah, if you mean multiplayer focused games,
all these games are live service components. They know that the player attention lies in the multiplayer. It's not in the single player. So all of these live service games, even if there's going to be a big single player focus, the multiplayer element is going to be the bit that retains people. Meaning that as soon as that disappears and they don't want to maintain the servers anymore, well, the experience very, very much risks just disappearing.
Yeah,
which is the bit that makes me a bit worried about it, actually, to be honest.
Yeah. I wouldn't support any of those games that completely cancel your single player experience just because they don't want to finance the multiplayer component. If they are separate, so you can still play the single player experience, okay, but I won't give money to people who would just cut you from the game as a whole.
Yeah.
I think that's the risk, though. I don't know what you think, Sarge. I mean,
yeah, I sort of agree. I think there's a risk to it, but I'm still gonna lean towards having both options.
Oh, you optimistic soul!
I mean, there's probably not going to be that. I think there's also a management part from the companies that does this. If you have fewer options, it's easier to manage, and in the end, it's probably going to benefit them. It's probably less time spent with the model of monetization, and there's less time spent on having multiple servers to support these services themselves and all that. But it would be interesting to see a game that actually is sort of a. But then again, we sort of have the like with the old classic MMOs, like the monthly subscription model. We do have that, but that has been proven to be successful in very few cases. Like World of Warcraft 1 does work, but that is also the biggest game in that department or that genre. But then we've seen games from time over and over again that have tried to do the same, but they have failed and had to go free to play.
Yeah, the only
Nothing
two
wrong
games
with that, but
that sort it at the minute are World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy 14, as you say.
yeah.
They're the two games that manage to sustain that model at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. So there's nothing wrong with going free to play as long as you have a fair monetization model there as well. Nothing wrong with that, but yeah, the model itself is probably hard to maintain, and there's also the issue with having so many multiple of them that the consumer itself, it's going to be a hassle for them. They're going to spend way more money than they would have otherwise. But yeah. There's just one little topic, or maybe this isn't going to be a little topic, but I think we have to keep it on the little topic. Patrick actually shared a link before we went live of Anita Sarkeesian. I didn't get to read the article, but apparently she's visiting Bioware and having a chat with the developers and so on. And that is also something that happened, I'm pretty sure, I'm not entirely sure if it was Anita Sarkeesian or not, but there was similar steps taken when it came to Mass Effect Andromeda, for example, where they tried to desexualize all the characters, not to be having that to be a focus, or removing norms where the woman can be the bad or the strong one, or just all that, and working with that more and more. But we've talked a little bit about this, and this is a really problematic subject to actually delve into, because this has been such a big part. Like these norms themselves has been such a big part of our gaming experience for so long, so we sort of expected them to be there, and they add a sort of a flavor to the game where you can play with these different norms and these different roles. But if you remove those in a game, everything, for me at least, when we're talking about Mass Effect Andromeda, becomes a little bit more bland. I'm not entirely sure who should I relate to here. Where should I find a character which I relate to, or a character that I find attractive, when they don't want to make attractive characters because that could be sexualized, and that could be something that works against whatever, the feministic community. Weird broad strokes there, but take that with a grain of salt. But it's still, it's going to be interesting how that affects Anthem and the future titles of Bioware, but that's certainly something that they have.
Sorry, just had this image of thank God for everybody who's making sure we've got equality. Otherwise, we'd have boob plates the size of mountains on the front of our chapels.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to be too much of a concern, if I'm going to be honest with Anthem.
No, probably not. It doesn't seem to have that focus, but that's always been the case with like Mass Effect or Dragon Age. The like romance part has been such a big part. When you sort of need to feel attraction towards the character you want to romance.
It's a very human thing, isn't it? I mean,
Mhm.
it's a human need, really. I mean, and fine, it might be a fantasy, and sure, there are criticisms that you could level at it. I completely agree, but at the same time, even in Mass Effect, it was a case of, these are not objects. That they actually do try and make the point that you're actually forming a relationship with these people before, we get down to business, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's like, that was, I think, probably, there might be room to improve. Everybody's going to have their own opinion on that, but
Yeah.
that's probably the most tasteful way they could have brought up that particular topic, I
Sure.
think.
But I think
I
think there's a balance to it to make it feel like, for example, like playing a video game is going into a fantasy world with a fantasy character, and I want to set myself in a fantasy setting where I want to be. I want to be immersed, and I want to have an experience. And if that experience is quite bland and the people in it aren't quite superhuman, because these are people that are going to be able to do feats that normal people wouldn't be able to do because it's sort of a fantasy or an RPG in that sense. And if that isn't the case, or if they've sort of toned that down and make it more bland and less epic, or people less beautiful or less muscular or less... when you say less and less all the time to make it more balanced, I think it's hard to know where to land in the end. I'm just concerned where they're going to land with it, because that part of Mass Effect Andromeda was actually something that quite bothered me. I couldn't connect to the characters, and I think that has to do a little bit with that being taken into account. So I think there's something for them to still joggle there.
I think we have a few games that actually manage to do that. Overwatch could be an example. Sure, their characters are also made to be attractive, but they at least have different model types and different body types. But I think there's another problem with that, because most of the graphical problems from Mass Effect stem from this change. We had the first trailer where the female rider was quite beautiful, quite thin, and made specifically to attract people. And then they changed everything in the game and changed the design of the characters. And you had those scenes that were graphically quite jarring, like when the rider character wakes up and she looks like she's giving birth, even though...
I'm sorry, my face is tired.
All that. Characters who were most likely changed after they thought of implementing some sort of social justice warrior stuff. You can also look at Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition, where you actually have the same character, your companion Cassandra is her name, where she was in the second one, also typical Bioware style, quite beautiful woman, and for no apparent reason she looked completely different in Inquisition, even though it was the same person, and her face didn't really work at all.
Yeah, but that's the thing about Bioware. They have been they've sort of been quite hard in the past when it comes to the sexualized content. Like the women had big breasts and small waists, and the men were muscular and whatever. And there's sort of a disconnect with being a fan of the genre, going into the new titles they release, where that's not the case. Now, I'm all for that. I'm for diversity and I'm for all that. But there's gotta be... I need to have something there. I'm not saying that it has to be sexualized in that way. It can be... hard topic. I feel
it is. It's an incredibly complex topic.
Yeah, I feel like
I think
walking on a thin thread here, but still.
Yeah, it's like there's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is the concept of show don't tell, especially in video gaming, because in video games it's so easy to get into this thing of they try and tell everything narratively rather than showing it. And this does sound like a bit of a tangent, but bear with me because there is some sort of point in here that I'm trying to make. It's like, as you were saying, actually, this is not part of the point. Actually, just go back to the Mass Effect thing of the female Shepard being quite attractive, quite beautiful. I'd just like to put the counterpoint in there. And I say this, as a dude who doesn't mind saying such things, is that the actual male Shepard was also quite an attractive fella.
He was. I mean,
but he still is.
They modeled him from was an actual model in real life. So he was an attractive man.
Just a little tad bit. He still looks like that. He still is a pretty handsome fellow, but they changed the female so drastically for no apparent.
Why? That, like I said, that's a bit of a thing. But this is, like I said, it's somewhat on the same subject where I read an article by a journalist called Laura Kate Dale, or you might also know as Laura Kay, who associates with Jim Sterling.
Yep.
And it was an interesting article because she played a game, and forgive me because I cannot remember the title, but it was effectively a Legend of Zelda Link to the Past sort of, I hesitate to say clone, but it was that style of game, top-down Zelda-esque game.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they'd done a gender reversal. So, the actual character who would be Link was a girl, and the character who would be Zelda was actually the prince. Fine, great, whatever. And I remember Laura talking about how isn't this wonderful, because there's now a character that I can finally relate to as the hero in this genre,
Indeed.
as there never was when I was a child. And the thing, this is more of a rant, I've realised, than a point, so I do apologise about this. But I fully take her point on this, and I do understand her opinion, and I do respect it. I think that's true. It is good to have representation in games. However, representation should not come at the cost of an individual artist's the story that they want to tell.
Yeah.
It's like, I remember, it's like Shigeru Miyamoto, when he came up with Legend of Zelda, and it might not have been this at first, but it turned into, you got Link, and you had Zelda, and you had Ganon, you had the Triforce, the trifecta, if you like.
Indeed.
And then as the series went on, you had effectively had these reincarnating souls that kept playing out the same roles. Legend of Zelda would not have worked really as it became without that concept, without Link and Zelda and Ganon.
The classic hero saves the princess concept.
Yeah, and sure, I can appreciate why some people are like, why is there not a game where the girl saves the prince?
Yeah, but that could be another game.
Yeah, there should be that game, but at the same time, it should be another game.
Indeed. And I'm all for, like, in the end, where I want to land with my point with this conversation is I want to... No worries. I'm interested in your points as well. But my point from this is that I want to be able to relate. I want to be able to be immersed. I want to feel like this is a world that I want to live in for a couple of hours. And when a company has an approach to making games and then suddenly switches that around and makes something totally different, that sort of creates a disconnect. They've sort of created a consumer base which love their products, and suddenly they say like, nah, we're not really making that thing anymore, so here's another thing that we want you to indulge in. And that, I don't know, I had that disconnect with Inquisition, I had that disconnect with Andromeda, and we're gonna have to see, like, from what I'm seeing in the trailer of Anthem, the world they're creating and the people in it loving it, can totally throw myself into that and get immersed and get connected and wanting to be characters and all that. But I feel like that is something that can't be lost in the hunt or the pursuit of diversifying games and desexualizing or removing the norms.
Can I just quickly add why I brought this article up?
Sure.
Sorry, sure.
You'll have to end this conversation.
The two main reasons, because I thought that it was important. The first one is I'm afraid that they will. I want to say diversity is a really good thing, but forced diversity is a really bad thing. And I think I'm scared that they will force Anthem to become a diverse game rather than make naturally a diverse game.
I think I was just thinking about this term, if you don't mind me interrupting. I think the perfect phrase to describe some of the events in the video game industry is that what a lot of developers don't seem to realize, what a lot of people don't seem to realize, is that diversity does not equal homogenization, which is what is going on when we sort of boil everything down and we have to have token characters of this gender, this race, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. That's rubbish. If that character fits into that role, or, that character has a place, and by all means, put them in. No complaints from me or anybody else, or at least there shouldn't be. But, just having them for the sake of having them, that's not how you are supposed to...
I totally agree.
Sorry, Patrick, I interrupted you again there.
Yeah, it's all right. And the other thing is the result of that they downgrade the graphical design of the characters for that specific reason, and
Yeah.
just create more graphic problems that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, this is obviously a topic we could talk about to the end of time, and I feel like
Definitely.
it would be interesting. It seems like we're sort of on the same page, and it would be interesting to have somebody on that we can have this discussion with that holds a totally different opinion of the matter.
That would be
Because,
interesting.
yeah, I would totally be open to that in discussion. So we'll have to see if we can actually find someone to get on the podcast, which we can have that discussion with. It could be quite heated. Now, like personally at work, I do a lot of work for diversity and removing the norms and all of that. So I'm all for that, but there's still that place where I feel like it shouldn't take precedence when there's a creative aspect to it. I feel like the designers themselves shouldn't be limited because of the decisions they have to when they take norms into consideration and so. But all right, that's enough for that. And there's actually enough for the first segment. We've sort of gone a little bit over time, but I think that's fine. It was a cool conversation, and I think hopefully people enjoy that. And we're going to move over to the next little segment that we have, which is called "Tell Me What to Do Until Next Week." I'm just going to stick with that. That was decided last week. This is the title of the segment that we're going to keep. So, yep, sure, that works. So, guys, do you have some interesting thing, a little tidbit, a little idea, a little series, a little creation that you can share with the viewers or the listeners to make their week a little bit brighter?
Do you want to go first, Patrick? Have you got something?
I have something, but I rather after you.
Oh, all right, okay, right. Something that I've watched very recently and thoroughly enjoyed, and this is a bit of a twofer.
All right.
So, but they do relate to each other. I have been watching lately Band of Brothers and Pacific. Yes.
Brothers.
Now, I've talked to this about. I've mentioned these things to quite a few people. I've been quite surprised when it said quite a few people have actually not themselves watched it, and I thought, wow, that's something. So,
Yeah.
Band of Brothers and the Pacific. If you have any passing interest in the sort of history of World War II and what it was actually like to have boots on the ground in that period, then these productions, I think, are probably some of the best dramatized productions that do justice to the actual subject at hand. Band of Brothers follows the 101st Airborne Division of the paratroopers who basically landed in Normandy on D-Day. And obviously, the American, this is more from an American perspective, but it's so very, very good.
Really
And
is.
then the Pacific follows the Marines, who basically were in the Pacific, right? In the Pacific theater. And they are amazing pieces of drama. Don't go in there not expecting blood and guts. They don't really shy away from this, but the actual drama and the stories, the real stories of real people that they actually tell in these series are just stunning. And if you've watched recently the movie Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan, and then you're thinking, well, that was enjoyable, that was harrowing, but that was enjoyable. I'm intrigued, and I'd like to know a little bit more or watch a little bit more and this sort of style, then you could do a lot worse than watching Band of Brothers and the Pacific. Two fantastic box sets. If I had to put my money on one, Band of Brothers. Pacific is still very good, but you do need to get past the first couple of episodes to really start to get the feel for it, I would say.
All right.
But really good stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. Band of Brothers. If you haven't seen Band of Brothers, this is one of those shows that you just have to. It's going to captivate you from beginning to end. It's brilliant. It's just one of those HBO shows that you actually really need to watch, like up there with Game of Thrones and a couple of other ones. So.
Oh yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Patrick, do you have something or?
Yeah, my recommendation would be, even though it's a huge game, StarCraft 2, because it's the Wings of Liberty campaign is free, as well as the multiplayer, as well as the arcade, where you can play a lot of different games and sub games scenarios, and also co-op. Co-op is also free. Sorry for my German. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. If you haven't checked it out, go ahead. And if you like it, you can buy the Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void expansion afterwards, but it won't cost you a cent.
Yeah, I think if you buy into the StarCraft 2 now, if you ever had an interest or if you've never bought it in the first place, it's actually something that I can recommend myself. It's really interesting, and I've heard some good things about the co-op options if you have a
Heard
friend
some
that you
very good things. It's
Yeah.
on my list of stuff I really need to look into. Actually, StarCraft
Yeah.
2.
So yeah, that's certainly something. And from
And not only
me,
that. Oh, sorry, Satch. Carry on.
were you gonna interrupt me, man?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I feel hurt. No, no worries. I actually have two recommendations, or it's one thing that I want you guys to check out or keep an eye on, which I found quite interesting. And there's also something that I want you to try out if you haven't. The first one is the free-to-play game Dirty Bomb, and this is a game that came out quite a while ago, but it's a game that I come back to every once in a while when I need a good first-person shooter. Because it's really solid, it's free to play, so I didn't have to actually buy into it. The progression, the free to play model is quite, I don't know, it takes a lot of time if you actually want to unlock stuff. So there's always that to keep in mind. But if you're skilled at first-person shooters, which I sort of consider myself at being, you can be really successful with the just basic stuff that you get. Of course, there's going to be people with upgraded stuff and added perks, and there's going to be some little bit of disadvantages and advantages that you have to work against and towards. So there's always going to be that. But if you're skilled at first-person shooters, check out Dirty Bomb if you haven't to. It's a great pastime if you need another game just to spend some time doing when you've tired of everything else. And also something that I want you guys to check out is a game called Deep Rock. Let's see here. Is that the developer or is that the... No, Deep Rock Galactic, the game is called. It sort of looks like Astroneer meets 7 Days to Die, sort of. I kind of like the feel or the look of that. If you haven't kept an eye on it, you should keep an eye on it because I love myself. Like 7 Days to Die, I've had great times with. If you don't know how that game works, it's basically a zombie survival game, but they have these mechanics where you build a base, and during the night there's storms of zombies or waves of zombies pushing towards your base, and you basically have to survive. So there's more gameplay elements than just being able to survive like there's in DayZ. But in Astroneer, you have this aspect of going around in sort of a fictional universe, and you create your own base and just sort of expand and mine minerals, and there's not that many hazards, or the environmental stuff is more the hazards in that game. There's not that many monsters that you have to kill and so on. But this game sort of looks like a mix of those two, and it looks like something that could potentially be a real blast with a couple of friends. So I'm really looking forward to a game like that.
Just want to point out,
Yeah.
tagline on the actual image, the banner image for this is Deep Rock Galactic, danger, darkness, dwarves. I'm sold. That's all I needed.
That's all you need, man.
Yep,
Danger,
dwarves.
darkness, and dwarfs. That's all you need in life. And then you can get buy-in to almost anything. Well, all right, so that's where we are actually going to leave you this time around. We had a really interesting discussion here. It went a little bit deeper into a couple of subjects than we have sort of done in the past. And this is something that probably is going to happen more once we go further with this project and this podcast, where we deep dive into a lot of different topics and conversations, which I quite enjoy myself. So if you want to pitch into these conversations, or if you had an idea of yourself or something to say about what we've said, or just simply say that you're wrong, you're right, whatever, then you can send us emails at feedback@gunsofanthem.com, and we will be happy to read those out loud. And if you have questions, or if simply just have feedback, leave that there as well. And that's about it. Whenever you've actually listened to this, if you've been on Facebook. If you've been on Facebook, and you have been on Twitter, and you have been on the YouTube, then thank you for watching. And if you're listening to this in podcast form, thank you for tuning in there as well. You should be able to find this sort of in any sort of podcast way or form you actually have access to, or it's on iTunes or SoundCloud if you just want to search those places and listen to it on your computer or whatever. But that's it, and I'm gonna have to say goodbye, unfortunately. We had such a wonderful time, and most of the times I just want to talk with these guys for ages. But yeah, it was a blast, and I really hope you tune in the next time. I'm Christian, also known as Saj, and until next time, guys, bye!